Hello and welcome back to Organized Chaos. Today I am joined by Vanessa Gilardi, a global head of people who has experience in scaling multiple startups and taking them internationally. She has recently worked at companies like Moonpay and blockchain.com, as well as large organizations throughout her experience. Throughout the conversation with Vanessa, we talked a lot about the state of HR in startups, the differences between HR in startups and large organizations, and then we took a deep dive into AI and how it's impacting the role of people operations and sort of the future we see for jobs moving forward. If you're an HR professional, this one is really for you, especially if you work at startups. So let's jump right in. Vanessa, welcome to the Organized Chaos podcast. Super great to have you. I was really excited to bring you on the episode after our first conversation. So why don't you kick us off by really introducing yourself to the listeners and telling us about how you got into HR. There's always really fun stories from that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here. So I'm Vanessa Gilardi. I'm a global head of people. I worked in really large corporation, 100,000 plus people, and really small startup and scale up in the tech world. So, if I take a step back after having started in HR many, many years ago, I realized that, I wasn't someone who wake up one day and just thought, oh my God, I'm going to be an HR lead. That's not how it happens.
I don't
I
think it
actually
happens for
started
anyone
to
that
work.
way.
Yeah. So I started to work very at a young age. I was 16 years old because I wanted to be independent. I had this grand idea that I wanted to live on my own, etc. Anyway, fast forward, it allowed me to test the corporate world very early on to understand what I wanted and what I didn't want. And from there, I went back to university. So I actually did 2 times career break to go back to academia. Which was interesting anyway, because I was an older student, right? And I had typical kind of college parties when, people were probably much younger. And so I learned a lot about myself in those kind of years when, people were already had vocational type of careers, such as being a lawyer, being a doctor. HR came a bit later. And I think when I came back to work after those kind of break in my career path, I always came with different goals. And I actually took, sometimes pay cut and sometimes title cut even. Because for me, the experience was much more important than having, a title on my CV or a number on the paycheck. And so, in short, I think I'm here to shape the trend, not to look at the trends, if that makes sense.
No, that's pretty interesting. I mean, you said a lot of things which you don't see a lot of people do, right? Because most people, I think I'm one of those people also who kind of found my passion for, the career I'm in right now much later than when I first got out of college. And a lot of people, they get stuck in that job that they just kind of hate and they just never get out of. But I think
Totally.
there's a lot to respect and admire about people who just, take a step back, they reassess, even sometimes to your point, taking a pay cut, even taking a job which is less senior than where you are today. But what I've also seen people like that do is they actually get back to where they were and even beyond much quicker, given also their experience. So that's pretty interesting. So Vanessa, you said something pretty important, and that's one of the things that you and I sort of talked about when we had our first conversation is you have this spectrum of experiences, which is pretty diverse between many different industries, but also different company sizes, right? The large enterprises, but also some of the startups, like blockchain.com, Moonpay, and others. Um, what are some of the differences that you see in people operations functions between established companies and early stage startups?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I hear that a lot. So I'm not surprised you're asking that same question. And for me, the modern workplace is really a reflection, or if you like, a mirror of what's happening in the society or in the business world, right? So, um, I think wherever I was, I always find bridges that connect to whatever the industry or the size of the company I was. And I think that's the beauty of learning in different environments, is to be able to connect the dots. If you think about large corporation, obviously much more hierarchy because of the size. It's simply a logical standpoint. And then you have usually a well-oiled machine that has been, working like that for a period of time. And what you hear often is, we have done that for many, many years, so we're not going to change. But I think beyond just that kind of phrase that you hear often is, being comfortable in your job and not taking enough risk usually come with the fact that it's hard to change. And to be honest, those kind of big companies, they have a Dave-ish model when it comes to HR. So it's very vertical. People have a very limited scope, right? And they also have, I think, you need to be successful in that. You need to be able to understand not only the hierarchy, the complexity of the company, but also the multiple layers of, process and operation that is behind it. And, I've seen in large corporation, it's hard to move things forward. If you take an example, HRS system, which is usually multi-million dollars of investments. And so changing that takes time, right? That's usually what frustrates people like me who wants to go faster and have an impact. And
Makes two of us.
so in the in the flip side, when you think about small organization, it's obviously much more agile. You usually in the plane while you're learning to fly. You organize the plane, architecture, the flights, etc. It requires a different type of skill sets. But I would say working in large corporation and small is not mutually exclusive. They are both really critical skills like best practices and practical experience that you can get in both. I think the beauty is to be able to connect the dots. But I would say in smaller organization, you have to develop a sense of urgency, doing the doing and demonstrate your value very quickly. I've been lucky to work in environments where you have a very good understanding of what's your capital, what's the revenue that we need to generate on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis to be able to simply operate. And I think if you're able to capitalize that in your HR activities, that gives you agency to be successful. If you don't do that, then you marginalize your experience, right? So it's an entrepreneurial mindset, less of an HR mindset. But I would say, you can do it. It's just a question of mindset.
You touched upon something which I talk a lot about on the podcast, and also something that I preach a lot about. And you touched upon this at the end, and I want to double down a bit on it. Is that you need to think like the business, like you need to think like an entrepreneur, not necessarily only an HR person. It's one of the things I see a lot of HR people struggle with when they move from these large corporate settings into a smaller business setting because their scope is probably a bit larger. They have more to do, right? There's more responsibility, accountability, but also your impact can be greater. When you're in a smaller organization, it's a smaller team. But that mindset is so important. And I've seen a lot of HR people actually struggle in smaller organizations because they just couldn't connect the dots and didn't have that mindset. Now, having said that, you actually opened up the path for me into my next question that I want to talk about. So, when I've seen in most cases HR professionals move from very large organizations into small startups, more times than not, I've seen them struggle a little bit. Not because they don't have the skills or the knowledge, it's actually the opposite, but they struggle to adapt to the life of a startup, to the volatility, to the quickness of decision making, and so forth. From your lens, given you've been in these two worlds before, what is the advice you would give to HR professionals that are moving from a large corporation to a smaller corporation? And what are some of the skills you would probably encourage them to develop so they can really succeed in this kind of environment?
I mean, again, a very good question because I think it has to come from you. I hope that the world of work see less of a hindrance, people who are coming from different industry, different sizes, different perspective. But from a candidate, I think your mindset is the key ingredient in the recipe, right? The least you challenge yourself, the more comfortable you are with an environment, the less risk you're going to take. It's the same in any type of business decision that you make. But I think what I'm saying here, and I want to be very clear, I'm not advocating for people to resign tomorrow. Sometimes it's just not possible economically, etc. But you can find, those adjacent initiatives or projects that make you grow and make your skills broader. And if it's not possible in your company because for whatever reason, it's not allowed or it's not something that is being done, I've seen a lot of people currently, especially simply younger generation, Gen Z, etc., moving into side hustle. And sometimes that's a good, perfectly fine income additionally to what they have. Doing kind of learning activities on learning platforms, so delivering courses, teaching on the side, or partnering with consultancy to get a bit more the SME skills being applied to something that does the work. And I think it's brilliant. I don't think this existed even 5 years ago. So I like to see that. But I think truly it's thinking about how you can maximize your knowledge. And in this environment where, it's a lot more competition out there. You're not competing only with people with the same skills and your peer locally, but you're competing with people globally. And now you're competing not only with that, but also with AI agents who are going to do your work for a knowledge-based skilled worker, right? So adjacent kind of knowledge rather than your T-shaped type of normalization of HR competences, thinking about the M-shape, where you can actually draw better competences with your skills is really, really important.
No, I think that's a very good perspective. I mean, something that I've seen not only in the HR profession, but typically, and I think you pointed to this beautifully, that a lot of the adaptation and building the skill set has to come from you personally. There needs to be that individual effort to begin with, because to your point, there are cases where if you're in a small company, you come in, they probably don't even have an L&D budget for you to go and get trained and certified and all that kind of stuff. But also, you and people are so busy doing the day-to-day work of the business that, I mean, let's be honest, no one has time for your own individual need to develop something. It's like, hey, figure it out, right? Hit the ground
Right.
running. Like chop chop, we need to move here. It's a startup, we need to make revenues and all that kind of stuff. But I do agree. There's a lot of the people I know who are really successful and who made this switch successfully. To your point, there are people who actually took a lot of self initiative, even sometimes self investment into learning. But also something that you mentioned that I like, something actually I did early in my career is I did pro bono work in HR
Mhm.
consulting, because
Absolutely.
I was like, I just learned this stuff. Let me just try it out and I'll just offer it for
Yeah.
free. And
Yeah.
hey, if it works, maybe I can think about it later on. And I know a lot of other HR professionals who moved from very different functions like operations, revenue, and all that kind of thing into HR, but also it did require some of that learning. So no, I think that's great advice for anyone listening. Just don't wait for your company to sort of push you into the learning. You
Abs-
need to sort of do it
yeah.
yourself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think personally, Gen Z is so important nowadays.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I'm seeing so many people now having side hustle in very different aspects of the work, which I think is going to democratize that kind of fractional work that is going to become more and more prevalent in the work.
Exactly. And to your point, I think a lot of companies have come to expect this now from some of their staff. And given that I work so closely with a lot of companies, a lot of employees actually very publicly say this to their employers that, hey, I do this side hustle as well. I'm not doing it during working hours, right? It's not impacting my work, but hey, just FYI, this is something I moonlight with. This is something I do the weekends, all that kind of stuff. So hey, just be aware, guys. Like I'm doing this. So not everyone really comes up front with that so much, but again, it's becoming very common these days. And again, it's a good way to learn more. It's a good way to actually diversify your skill set, because to your point, you need to be a very diverse professional in terms of your understanding, your knowledge, your competencies today, especially in a small company where you're doing so much. You're wearing multiple hats as opposed to being boxed in a very specific job role, like in most huge companies these days. But no, that's pretty interesting. So again, Vanessa, you've been someone who's worked at this large spectrum of companies, right, from small to large companies, but you've also been involved in a lot of the global expansions and scaling of some of these
Mhm.
companies. I'm someone also who works a lot with scaling companies, and a
Yes.
lot of times scaling. it sounds great. It sounds pretty. We're growing, right? It sounds like this fairy tale, like the best thing ever, which generally it should be. But scaling is where I've personally seen a lot of companies fall flat on their face. Like as they go into the scaling territory, they actually don't do it very well, and they actually crash themselves or inhibit some of their growth and so forth. So for someone like you who's been through some of these global expansions and scaling before, what is the advice that you can give to any HR professional out there who's actually in a scaling environment and they're trying to scale a startup over time?
I mean, look, it doesn't look as pretty as a strategy map pitch deck that says, hey, we're expanding globally. The work that you need to do behind the curtains is really exponential, right? And it is hard. It's hard work, it's challenging, etc. So it's
Yeah.
not for the faint-hearted, but it can be done. And many people like you, like myself, we have done that. You start with your three principle, which is, the strategy, which is the why, the purpose, which is the what, and the culture, which is the how. And then once you have that mapped out, you can really deep dive into the other vertical of, HR strategy, your mission and vision, your communication, your data culture, as well as your process and system. And I think if you can map that out, it will help you to start to move the dial as you grow and not to be taken a back foot into your employee experience. Because I think what can happen if you don't have that is that you may lose on hiring speed. You may lose a few talent, but the worst thing that can happen is that you delay your business strategy, right? And so I think obviously on top of that, you have culture, you have, all the employment relation and regulation and things like that, that's added onto that. And I think it's important to have a kind of cohesive common denominator, and then you can apply this locally for it to make sense. But I think, going back to the framework and always refreshing it is kind of a way to be prepared and adapt it as you go.
No, I think that's great. What I hear is that it needs to be a very deliberate balancing act of a lot of different
Mhm.
things happening at the same time, right? And I think you,
Mm.
you mentioned something which is really good, is you need to keep the business objectives in mind. You need to also keep all the HR stuff that impacts that in mind as well, right? Like, hey, how will the work I'm doing in hiring impact what the company's doing in terms of revenue or growth, and so on and so forth? Hey, well, if we drop the ball in compliance, we might be in trouble in XYZ markets, right? There's a lot of moving parts with scaling. But no, I think you summed it up pretty greatly, is that you need to keep your eyes on the ball at all times, but also it is that fine balancing act. There are some cases where you're going to have to push on something, pull on something else, and so on. And again, something which I think you said, which I completely resonate with, is it looks much prettier when you look at like your strategy deck, and everyone just sort of, on these board meetings and executive meetings, everyone's just talking about the strategy. It seems like it seems like it makes so much sense. It's going to be so easy to implement, and things are going to fall in place. But usually, like most professionals who've been doing this for a while, you notice that the plan doesn't go exactly according to plan.
Mhm.
There's going to be some
Exactly.
changes, some pivots, but it's very good to have the end in mind of where you're getting to, and how you get there sometimes moves along the way, especially with fast growing companies, which is great. So, but no, thanks for sharing that, Vanessa. Now, I'm going to move into a topic that you sort of alluded to a little bit earlier when you started talking about AI and maybe taking over your job. And, you and I, when we first spoke about this, and again, even still today, AI is kind of this rage right now. It's all the rage. And not a day goes by without me hearing something about AI, reading a post, getting a newsletter. It's everywhere at all times. And, obviously, we're still in the very early stages of it, of really what most are calling the AI revolution. And to be honest, probably especially in the HR field, it's not super clear how people need to use it or want to use it. So, and again, it's probably the same with most other industries. But I'm interested in how you see AI transforming the people function, especially in scaling organizations, and maybe what should people leaders be focusing on to really prepare for this, revolution, evolution, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. It's something you can't escape. And I almost like it seems we are at this junction where we have an AI overdose. I personally I
I know.
love writing on this stuff. But at the same time, there's so much information that I think for humans, capability to understand the change and keep up with the pace, it's almost impossible. And if you think about ChatGPT, it's 2.5 years old, right? It's so new. But in that very short period of time, if you look back at AI specific companies, between 2023 2024, there were about 200 organizations that were AI led. And now you have more than 1,000. And even that number is quite low. And so, there's plenty of, I'm sure, email that you receive from vendors about the AI tool, etc., the AI generation and efficiency. That's great. But I think the research showed that it takes so much time for humans to oversight, what AI is regulating to you. That, so far, I would say in terms of efficiency and ROI, we're just at the top of the iceberg, and we need to be to get a lot closer to the bottom. But all that said, I think we know that there's going to be some changes in roles and HR technology, definitely. If I was a CEO today, I would probably, think about, okay, how much can I think about efficiency from a financial perspective and, my employee, work base. So it's just important, I think, for HR to understand that. And when I think about tools and capabilities, I also go through a framework. I love framework, event diagram, stuff like that. But I think it helps to understand how you can actually bucket things with more clarity. And so I always start with the first thing is problem solving. What type of problem you're trying to solve? Because not every AI shiny tool will have a space in your HR tech stack. And it's very possible that you're going to spend a long, long time looking at all of them when actually you can streamline that. And then the second is context. Context is king. Your business context matters. And what would work for a big tech giant like Amazon will not work for your, say, A to C, right?
Yeah.
And sustainability is very important. Like, don't try to overthink and overhaul everything. If things are working well and they can be scaled, sometimes, the answer is not more HR stack.
So you dropped a lot of amazing snippets when you were talking about this, because yeah, first thing, I think what I'm seeing a lot of is people thinking, "Hey, this is AI. It's like throwing it at the wall, throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping and seeing what sticks. Hey, we need to have an AI strategy. Let's throw AI at everything, that we're trying to do." But to your point, it's very important to be clear. Okay, what am I trying to solve for, and in what context am I trying to do this? Because I don't think anyone today does not use AI in any form or fashion, right? I mean, I think for the past year, I've been using it almost every day. I started playing around with ChatGPT a couple of years ago. And over time, it was like, yeah, let me try to do everything with it. But then over time, like, yeah, it doesn't do well with this context, but it does well with that context, and so forth. And just figuring out where does it plug into your workflow, which makes more sense. To your point, just like any kind of tool you're using or any kind of technology, it's always important to start with what you just mentioned is what is the problem you're trying to solve? That is the starting point, right? Because without that, just trying to throw it at something and just hoping that it solves it or makes it better is probably no different than trying to solve any other problem this way as well. Are there any specific tools that you've seen have made a big impact on your day-to-day work, and maybe have given you great ROI? Are there any you could share with any listeners out there who might be interested in diving into HR or sort of want to focus and narrow it a little bit?
I mean, I'm like you, like I love to test stuff like that because it's my shiny new toys. But I'm trying to keep it content to what I need, problem solving, again, context. And so it's hard, I think, still to drive real metrics on ROI just yet because we testing, right? We testing, we implementing, but that's very, very early on. But I think three things that I've seen really working well that I would not leave, I would actually continue to implement and improve. The first one is meetings. And I think that's something that we've discussed when we started to
Oh,
talk about
yes.
our discussion. Having those kind of meeting tool on the side when you have a conversation like we have today, we can concentrate and really focus on our discussion. And we can leave AI to actually deliver great input after the call, follow up, and being very specific about what has been said and what can be done to even improve the meeting later on. I think those tools, to my experience, I don't think they're gonna go. I think this is going to be implemented in most organizations because they are so important. They can even look at your metrics and say, "Hey, you don't need that meeting. Great!" Like people would love that, and be replace a meeting with something more intentional. The second thing is career coaching. I'm an executive coach myself, so I would like to preach for my choir, but I also have to be honest with the fact that executive coaching costs a lot of money. You can't have an executive coach for every single employee. Like it's not the right thing to ask for a business to for deliver a budget. But what you can do is that you can have an AI agent that is very specific to your goals of the company, that works with every single employee to try to support them to achieve those goals. And then on the side, you still have exec career coach that works on different type of developments that an AI tool might not be suited to. So all of that is kind of lower the access of, employee development. And I think it's great. And the third one was L&D. I started to use certain tools to produce some L&D content. So imagine your very boring compliance kind of program that you need to have for every people that are onboarded. The thing is, those kind of training, they need to be different from every employees, depending on where they are. I think the US, obviously you're in certain states, it's going to be very different in another state. Same in Europe,
It's a
right?
nightmare. You're going to depress me, Vanessa, and I'm starting off my day now.
Sorry, but it's going to get better because those kind of tools, you can have a common denominator with what you're trying to teach, make AI reflect on the location where the employee is, adapt the content specifically for that. And before you needed to have, an LLM assistant that you pay a lot of money to be able to do that. Now you can almost kind of standardize that to the point where it's very locally based. You can even use a local dialect that is not going to be English. That's going to be the language that the people want to use, which I think is fantastic from a DI standpoint.
I like how you framed it like three different areas and buckets of the HR function where you sort of experiment with this stuff. When you first said meetings, I think my heart rate went up because I mean, so meetings are such a mess when you leave them to humans to sort of organize everything around them and dissect them. And to your point, I think a summary from a lot what you're saying is, and something that I've experienced personally with AI tools as well is, I think as of today, and again, it's still early days. I think when it comes to AI, and we're probably like 5 years from now, we're going to look back and think we were in the dinosaur age based on what we're doing today.
Yes.
But AI has been very effective in doing things that us humans are not very well at doing. For example, doing routine tasks that take us a lot of time and so forth, they can do pretty quickly. The example I think you gave about like compliance-based training and so forth, I think is a tremendous example because when AI has a set of constraints and a data set and information and context, which is pretty boxed and well defined, it can give you excellent output. Like, for example, the labor law is the labor law. So
Mhm.
whenever it changes, great, you can, the AI tool can access that, but it's a very structured problem. Where I've seen AI fall flat so far is when you give it a very unstructured problem and you're expecting the AI to do a lot of critical thinking that humans actually shine with, you'll see a lot of inconsistency there. But again, a lot of it has to do with what you mentioned earlier is the context. Like the output from an AI tool is going to be as good as your input, which is the prompt that you give it and any documentation and information. If your context isn't good enough, the AI output isn't going to be good enough as well. So I think, but that's a very important distinction. Like when you're giving such a structured problem, I've seen it do
Yeah.
so well, and it's actually much better than humans, to be honest. The meeting thing, yes, the meetings. I mean, from organizing them to analyzing your meetings to even like the note taking afterwards, with tools like Fathom and so forth, it
Mhm.
saves you so much time. I know we implemented Fathom with a Cumulus Synergy company. I had their HR function today. It was saving us approximately per interview around 30 to 40 minutes just with the
Yeah,
AI
I'm not
note take.
surprised. Yeah.
you know? And if you're hiring a lot of people, I mean, take 30 minutes per interviewer and multiply that by the number of interviews you're conducting. And if you're scaling pretty quickly, that's a lot of hours that you're
Yes.
saving and that you could
Yeah.
do for something else, which is amazing. So let's finally talk about the culture piece of things, right? And you did touch upon some of these things earlier, right? About employee experience and culture and so forth. How do you see AI and really the future of work impacting culture in organizations, and how do you think companies need to evolve in order really to accommodate a lot of these technological changes and shifts that we're going to be seeing,
Mm.
starting we're seeing right now, but also going to see more of in the future.
Well, I think to me, it's almost the most important question, right? Because, we hear and we see a lot of AI information and stuff coming into our way. I think what's lacking is probably the understanding of how we're going to have to change from a society perspective almost, right? And maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not in HR because I want to implement nice playbook and regulatory stuff. I think I have an ethic and a responsibility to also think about employee and how you can train them for the future of work. And to me, it's something that I take very seriously because you can't have, millions of jobs being displaced and not as an employer being able to lead them consciously with what they will need to do tomorrow. And it may not be a framework that is static, that's going to change every month, probably, or every 6 months. But I think the most important thing you need to do is to be able to explain how AI is going to be used, why you're going to use it, and, is it going to be safe for employee as well? Because the last thing you want to do is that people asking you, oh, is a bot actually choosing whether I'm being promoted in the next cycle? That's very valid question. And I think that's the responsibility of a company to also, think about critically where AI is going to start and where it's going to finish and knowing the limitations. And I would say this, I think as culture and society is going to transform, we have here a very, a real responsibility to continue to focus on human skills and this, kind of layers of experience that I talked about before that will give you context into how you make decisions are really, really important. So I take an example. If someone comes to me and say, hey, I just come back to the workplace. I took a sabbatical to travel the world or learn new thing. Great. I don't come from HR. I come from, I don't know, finance, accountant, whatever. And I want to come to HR. Awesome. I want to lean into, certain specific HR tools and AI, and I'm an engineer. Come over here. All those kind of linear but really important experience that we can draw into in our profession. They are so, so important. And I think the best investment you can do for yourself is invest into those human capabilities and those life experience that will help you to understand the tech world out there.
When I think of AI and moving forward, I mean, I think from an organization perspective, and again, this might be years ahead and maybe a lot of years ahead, but I think there's probably going to be a workplace in the future where humans are only doing things that require a lot of intellectual capacity to do, things that an AI tool will probably struggle with doing as it moves forward. But also, it might mean that a lot of like some of the redundant work we do today, a lot of the admin work we do will probably go away completely because AI tools will actually be able to do them and a lot better than we will. What does that mean from a culture perspective? I actually think it'll be good for us because, I mean, if you think of a lot of the stuff that stresses people out, burns them out, and so forth, a lot of it has to do with a lot of work, right? And a lot of the work that takes a lot of time from people is typically work which isn't as important as it needs to be. Things that AI tools can be doing. A lot of times, I mean, there's a report I saw a while back, and I'm trying to remember what the source was. I mentioned it in one of my previous podcasts. I think the average American worker spends around 5% of their time doing actual work, and the rest 95% is between meetings, searching for files, and responding to instant messages from people, which is kind of crazy if you think of it. I mean, if you're spending 5% of your time only working, imagine the amount of output and productivity you can actually deliver if you were spending 50% of your time doing actual work, right? I mean, from my perspective, I think organization cultures over time can improve with AI. To your point, I think there's a lot of watch outs. We need to take baby steps with it, especially in the HR function. There's a lot of sensitive information and a lot of
Yeah.
things that could go wrong. And who knows what the legislation is going to look like in a couple of years from now, and some of the labor laws and all that kind of stuff, which might also chart the trajectory which you will take with AI. But I think, yeah, to your point, I'm one of those people who's optimistic about AI, and it's like every revolution that's happened before. There's going to be jobs which might go away, yes, and I think it's all for the better, and it'll just let people do what they do best, which is really use the brains they have, which is the most powerful thinking machine out there. And I think it'll be probably not in my lifetime for an AI to be able to think as well as a human being with the inputs that they get. But hey, I might be wrong too. But
Watch this space. Let's have another chat in, well, let's say 5 years, and we'll see.
I know, I know. I think we'll look at at this interview and look at like, oh my god, what were we thinking, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But that's the beauty of it, is that the future is not yet written for us, and I
Yes.
think we have a chance to write it as well. And that's a once in a lifetime opportunity.
No, I agree. I agree. So, Vanessa, this was a great chat. I really appreciate your time again.
Likewise.
And for people who want to reach out to you, hey, they have questions about this stuff. They want to learn from you. They want to work with you. What's the best way to reach you?
LinkedIn, always my go-to.
So what I'll do is, for anyone who's listening out there, Vanessa's LinkedIn profile will be in the show notes. So if any one of you wants to reach out to Vanessa and you want to talk more about the stuff that's on this episode, feel free to reach out. And Vanessa, great having you again. And I'm going to take you up on that offer to chat again in a few years from now, and we'll see how that goes. And I think
Oh,
we're going to have a
amazing.
laugh when we have that conversation.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks.
Well,
Thanks
that's great
again.
to be here. Thank you for
Yeah.
the really inspiring conversation and questions. And I'm looking forward to see you in 5 years.
Thank you. Likewise. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting retrospective from, from where
Yeah,
we are today. All right,
absolutely.
Vanessa. Thanks. Thank you again.